Don Draper. Ah, the classic man of mystery and mystique. He's the ultimate projection of the masculine ideal. He's the one whom the women want and the men want to be. He drinks when he wants and he smokes when he wants. He is the respect of even those who don't like him. He is the envy of those around him. He has a beautiful blonde wife and a passel of young, cute kids. He is a parade of equally beautiful mistresses. He can swoop in and save a failed presentation by delivering a speech that's so eloquent and irresistible that not only does it work on the clients, but they fall over themselves praising him. He has a difficulty connecting to others. His drinking incapacitates him. He drives away the people closest to him. His wife leaves him, and he falls in love with another woman only to marry her immediately and suffer through years of that marriage deteriorating before collapsing entirely. His daughter walks in on him having sex with another woman, and the relationship between them is never the same. His taciturn stoicism leads to a loneliness that cannot be drowned out by booze, or smoking, or sex, as the identity he constructed with his own hands after stealing another man's name is malleable and empty and insubstantial, forcing him into a never-ending series of existential crises. Wait, what? But if we want to understand Don Draper the person, we have to first understand Don Draper the image. But before we can understand that image, we have to understand why and how that image was created. It's often said by the fans of Mad Men that the show really isn't about advertising, but rather uses that as a conduit for deeper stories about finding personal identity in the rapidly changing world of the 1960s. And to some extent that's true, but the natural follow-up question is, obviously, then why does it take place in an advertising agency? Why is that where they chose to set this story? The answer is that advertising is an effective symbol for the flaw that unites the cast. Advertising is not about changing lives. It is not about affecting deep personal connection. It is about instant gratification. It is about selling fantasies that self-improvement isn't a matter of introspection, but a matter of making a single change in approach that will make everything perfect. Though the main cast of characters sell advertising, they too often buy into that mentality. The greatest flaw across the cast is believing that their failure to attain the elusive contentment and lasting joy they desire is a matter of the choices they make rather than the people they have become. Unlike in The Sopranos, which Mad Men showrunner Matthew Weiner wrote for, it is not as though there is no way out for these characters. This is a more optimistic series, but it shares The Sopranos' simple yet sobering answer as to why people don't change. It's hard, especially when the life already lived offers vast material reward. True change only arises when one is not only able to take a long hard look at themselves, but is able to create a new identity. The characters in Mad Men cannot achieve this. However, unlike the characters in The Sopranos, their response is not to ignore the possibility of changing. They can't. They can't bear the voice in themselves calling out for change. They don't want to loathe themselves, so they make superficial changes. They change who they want to be, but they don't change who they are. As these changes are superficial, they are eventually backtracked upon, and new changes are needed. It's tragically like advertising. Not only is advertising shallow, it is inherently shallow. It has to be. Of course, no one's spiritual needs are going to be satisfied by a new pair of shoes, but more pointedly and tragically, it is better for the advertisers if those needs are not satisfied. What they want is for those shoes to satisfy you for a short time, then wear out quickly, so you have to buy another pair. And they want the emotional payoff to be even more short-lived. You're content for a short while, there's a burst of joy, but then that settles, and you're left in the same depressing rut as before. If there is a single message to Mad Men, it is this. Short-term, superficial emotional payouts, the kind that make you feel good and conform to an ideal of what you're supposed to be, but do not actually change the patterns that resulted in the malaise you're attempting to escape from, are vastly inferior to the more difficult, but also more rewarding, introspection needed to move forward. Don Draper is the perfect avatar for this show because Don Draper the image was literally created out of these short-term payoffs. Draper the image is superficially compelling but completely hollow, just like the advertising he sells. Those who celebrate Don Draper as this handsome, arrogant, hard-drinking, incredibly talented, charismatic, immensely sexual epitome of traditional masculinity are missing the point, as are those who criticize him for the same reasons. The emptiness that haunts him throughout the series is a direct result of his decision to construct his new identity out of shallow images. He's not Sean Connery, or Humphrey Bogart, or Ernest Hemingway. He's a facsimile of such. He's this poor boy from the Midwest who has adopted these traditional American ideals as his identity because they are the standard of success. The wife, the kids, the job, none of it satisfies him because he's not pursuing his genuine desires, but rather what he is expected to want. Because of this, he resembles classic, tragic characters from 20th century American literature, such as Gatsby from Gatsby, or Thomas Sutpen from Faulkner's great southern epic Absalom, Absalom, or more specifically, Willie Loman from Miller's Death of the Salesman, or Hickey from O'Neill's The Iceman Cometh. All four of these characters invested themselves in a vision of personal renewal that they were never going to be able to achieve because they invested themselves in the ultimate ideals of flawed societies. Because of this, they are not distinct characters, but mirrors of a flawed ethos that tempts ordinary citizens with a dream of prosperity that they will never be able to attain. I single out Loman and Hickey here because, like Draper, they both pride themselves on their salesmanship. They're tasked with not only selling products, but also selling promises that those products will bring hope and fulfillment. What they are unable to realize is that they have also sold themselves on false promises. However, Draper is ultimately unlike these characters because he has not sold himself to the American ideal, but rather immersed himself fully in it, removing all hints of Dick Whitman, the person he was before Korea. Unlike Loman or Hickey, he has what he aimed for. Unlike Gatsby or Sutpen, there are no personal flaws to drag him down, because the entire person of Don Draper is hardly an actual person. He's a shell. This is why Pete's attempts to copy him throughout the series fall flat. Pete can only recognize the shell, and not the tortured person beneath it. He takes on the trappings of Draper eventually, and realizes that there's nothing beneath those trappings but utter despair, and only with great effort is Pete able to pull himself back from that abyss and stop himself from falling into the traps that doomed Draper. The original Don Draper is not the protagonist of the show, but an officer who was killed in Korea. The young Dick Whitman, wanting to rise, took his identity. Even from the start of the series, the real Draper has been dead for about a decade. He is not the dead man, and he is not Dick Whitman, the person he was. He is a non-person, constructed from ideals. Mad Men is not opposed to the idea of self-reinvention, but it does assert that this is a hopeless process when it is founded on attempting to live up to an image of what one ought to be. Peggy struggles mightily about deciding what image to model herself after, and she can only move forward when she stops attempting to define herself by either following or ignoring societal expectations, and instead derives a new conception of self from her entire set of experiences, both pleasant and painful. Because Don Draper the image is inherently hollow, it can shift to fit the times. After divorcing Betty, the 50s ideal of a perfect woman, he marries Megan, the 60s ideal of the new and liberated woman. He takes his malleability to be an advantage, as it allows him to adapt, and as an advertising genius who wants to sell products to the masses, it is an advantage, but as a broken and lost man attempting to figure out who he is, it is a major detriment. Beneath the facades and the cynicism, the true Don Draper / Dick Whitman has but two defining character traits. The first is his loneliness, and the second is his relentless desire to eradicate that loneliness. Because of this, he pursues the values held dear by the society in which he lives. He attains material success and creates a picturesque family. Don and Betty are the traditional image of the perfect couple, to the extent that they were said to resemble the plastic figurines of man and wife placed atop wedding cakes. There's nothing wrong with this, Mad Men holds, but he wants these not because they are intrinsically appealing to him, but because he believes they will help him allay his loneliness, which they do not. During his second marriage, which is to the young Megan Calvé, Don wants a fresh start, and he makes every attempt to pursue this. His marriage with Betty fell apart when she discovered his past, so he attempts to correct that mistake by telling Megan of his past from the beginning. When she accepts him despite this, he believes with all his heart that the marriage will succeed. What he is unable to understand, however, is that the problem is not who he was or what he did, but rather the facade he created to depart from that. Megan might know the facts of his past, but his relationship with her is still based on artifice. He continues to believe that this artifice will cure the emptiness inside him, instead of realizing that the emptiness is an inherent facet of the malleable and entirely hollow persona he has created. He wants a new start with Megan, but he does not understand the base problem. Ever the advertising man, he sells himself a superficial fix that will satisfy him in the short term, but will leave him grasping for meaning again before long. He fails to realize that the problem is not his perspective. The problem is him, the half-person he is and has been since Korea. America changes as the decade progresses, and he drifts through these changes.
Turn off your mind, relax and float downstream. It is not dying. It is not dying. Lay down.
The American ideal changes, and so does he. He does not realize that this will not help, because the problem is that he is in consistent and constant pursuit of that ideal. He is an amorphous man. To move forward would require him to accept the whole of his legacy and form an identity based on that. But he can't do that. Draper believes that the past doesn't matter, that it can just be covered up or chased away, but in this he is proven to be wrong time and time again. Just because he was divorced from Betty does not mean their lives no longer intersect. On a grander scale, he cannot escape the past because he sees its ignominy as a failure of approach and not as a natural consequence of his constant pursuit of an image. Tellingly, the moments that give him the intense connection for which he has been searching are those when he halts in the pursuit of that image. Don Draper, the facade, fades, and we see the person who calls himself Don Draper but has not accepted being Don Draper, that figure of open, barren loneliness. These come in the form of 3 relationships throughout the show. All 3, interestingly, considering the impression he attempts to create of this uncaring, cynical, dominant alpha male, are platonic relationships with women in which he becomes intensely vulnerable. The first of these is with Anna, the widow of the original Don Draper, an older woman who doesn't only know his real name, Dick Whitman, but also knows the vulnerable shadow existing beneath the persona. In the later seasons, there is also his daughter, Sally, whose trust he loses completely and has to try to gain back. Unlike the older cast, the traumas of her childhood disrupted her so intensely that she does not chase images other than the picture of being completely different than her parents and their broken lives, and this is a picture that Draper tells her is nonsense. She does not cling to these ideals, she merely wants to know the truth, and he gives it to her. The last and most important of these connections is with Peggy, and it is here that we see Draper's missed opportunities. In Season 4, after receiving a phone call that he knows is about Anna's death, he has a powerful series of conversations with Peggy that break down the relationship from being between a mentor and a student to something much more personal. It is achingly moving television that comprises the best episode of this show, The Suitcase. It is one of the few times when Draper chooses real personal connection over shallow artifice. This gives him a route to moving past the inherently lonely and hollow persona he has created for himself, but he cannot do it. When the company is in danger, he stops being earnest, returns to shallow artifice, writes a seemingly heartfelt letter out of cynicism, then marries his secretary and believes that will fix his life and give him a fresh start. This is the epitome of Draper's flaw. Only when he cuts ties with the artificiality and embarks on a genuine journey of transformation can he move past the image hunting and conclude the 20-year quest of attempting to figure himself out and eradicate his loneliness and despair. This time, at the end of Season 7, he has made himself completely genuine. He is not distracted. He cuts ties and moves forward. What he does after that is not important. For the first time in 20 years, he is no longer a reflection of shallow aspirations, but instead has an actual identity that reflects his varied and complex life. His story is not a tragedy, but it takes a long way to get there. The man of mystery has been a compelling archetype because of the ambiguity. What is seen, the good looks, the talent, the confidence, is no more compelling than what is not seen. Mad Men, however, posits that the answer to what is behind the mask is nothing but loneliness and disconnect.
If you listen, I'll tell you how he got there. How he forgot where he was going, and then he woke up.
The best shows are always misunderstood by a large portion of their viewership. The Sopranos is a direct response to the glamorized Godfather-esque version of mob life. Tony Soprano is not Corleone, Michael, or Vito. However much time he and his friends spend talking about The Godfather, He is an intense paranoiac, born into a world of decline that he cannot hope to reverse. He has dreams he cannot understand, and he goes to the shrink, looking for an answer he will not be able to find. He's not this awesome badass. Neither is Walter White, who loses his humanity over the course of the series, yet retains the support of many fans. Neither is Don Draper, for whom the very traits that earn him the most applause from fans are those that most keep him from achieving the growth he needs. This misunderstanding is inevitable, though, and it does not affect the quality of the actual shows, thankfully. It's just something to keep in mind. So if you liked what you saw today, consider donating to my Patreon so I can produce even more mysterious content. Also, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that enigmatic stuff. Adios, comrades!